All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hakeman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Very pumped to be recording and talking on this topic today. I am inspired by a client conversation that I had this past week. Individual is not a competitor, into like the fitness space, maybe wants to compete one day, but like generally in our time working together, the goal has been build, cut, build. And she comes to me this past week and she's like, I know that you talk about a lot of PEDs. I know you go into depth on like how they can be used for your athletes and for athletes who are within the sport of bodybuilding. But I want to get more information. I want to understand how they could be applied to my situation, my circumstances. And this isn't something that is abnormal. I would say majority of the people I work with, they have some kind of interest in PEDs, whether that be for stage or just the fact that they want to know more about them. And I understand, because I mean, being in the sport myself and being in the fitness space, it is kind of a taboo topic, and it's something that when you catch wind of, you're like, wait, what? Like, people are getting faster and better results and seemingly doing it with less work or doing it in a shorter time frame. And yeah, like I understand. And with this client specifically, I really had to, bite my tongue, because I wanted to be like, like they're not needed. Like, you're not at a point where they're going to benefit you. But also I know that that doesn't always go over well when you just snuff out curiosity. So I positioned it differently. I was like, okay, what would you hope to get out of using them? Because she had a few that people at her gym had talked to her about, and she's like, yeah, I think I want to do a cycle of Anavar. I think I want to add in some Clen. And I'm like, cool, okay. Inside, I'm like, you're not at a point where these are going to make that big of a difference, because frankly, you're not being that consistent. And also you're in a fat loss phase. So like Clen, maybe Anavar, not a great selection. But as much as like I might be able to, verbalize that to maybe a seasoned competitor or someone like I know a little more personally. With her, I really wanted to instill this idea that like there should be a framework even in the decision making around using them. So instead, I didn't say that. It's like, okay, let's have a conversation around what it looks like to be ready to use PEDs. And let's see, based on this discussion, if you fall into that category. So for listeners who aren't familiar, PEDs, I am talking about performance enhancing drugs. These are not exclusively steroids, but oftentimes when discussed, it can get lost in translation. But oftentimes when people say PEDs, it garners at least clarity around like, do you mean steroids? Do you mean non-androgenic PEDs? Because there are different types. So just to be clear there, when I say PEDs, I'm really meaning like anything that could be performance enhancing or physique enhancing, in our case. But the decision around like whether or not someone is ready to use PEDs, it's not yes or no. And it's not something that you can answer in 5 seconds, even though it probably seemed like that's what I was doing. And as a coach, I'll say like, I do have some like benchmarks that I'm like, if this person is doing X, Y, and Z, I'm going to discourage them from using. And here are certain criterias, or at least like, points that if they have in place, okay, that is leaning more towards, yeah, this could make sense. Like there could be an argument for using them. But I think globally for you guys, like I just want to walk you through this framework that I walked this client through, because really it came down to understanding why she wanted to use them. And I don't think she had a grasp on that either. So it was nice to see that like even me prompting her in an open-ended way, like that helped her like gain an understanding that like, oh, like I'm wanting something that I don't really understand. And this ultimately came down to explaining what they do, what specific drugs do, and also encouraging her to really consider whether or not she's in a position where if she did put them in place, would it make a difference based on like a health score, based on where she's at currently without them. I did go through the risk, and the reality is she's probably gonna fucking use them. Even if I say don't do it, she's gonna use them. That happens a lot. And through this conversation, essentially, I was able to at least like make her feel good, or I don't know, make myself feel good that she was informed of all the risk and like truly had an understanding of around like this is what could happen, and even though there's a low likelihood, it still is a possibility. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm breaking it down for you. Sorry it took me 6 minutes to explain the topic for today. Are you ready to use PEDs? That's what we're getting into. So I think it's important to have a very clear understanding of the reason and the destination. And if you watched last week's video, I believe it's last week, how to get shredded, it was kind of the same prompt. Is like, if you want to get shredded, we need to know what you define shredded as. Like, we need to have a clear understanding of what that looks like, because you're not just gonna be like, I want to go north and get in your car and then, just drive. You probably have like, there's probably a place you're trying to hit, or there should be, unless like you are just kind of like going with the flow and like you're seeing where it takes you. But when it comes to PEDs, or really anything that have any kind of risk profile, the first question I ask, and I think clients can get uncomfortable when I ask this, is what is the reason? What do you think the PED will do for you? And there's two different types of goals, or two different types of answers. And again, neither are wrong, but there's the concrete goal of like, I want to gain 5 to 7 pounds more muscle for X date or specific competition, or even in the case, like I just want to add muscle. I've had that too, where lifestyle clients are like, I just want to be denser. I want more muscles so I look leaner at not necessarily a super shredded physique. Sick. There's that. And that's kind of borderline between a concrete and an abstract goal. But the abstract goal would just be like, I'm gonna look jacked. I want to look better than I currently do, and I want to do it in a shorter time frame. I want to look super impressive. But again, this kind of goes back into what I was talking about with like how to get shredded in that solo episode. But it's important to understand as a coach or as the individual, how do you define that? Is it specific lines in your physique? Is it a specific body fat with like a certain look to it? Or is it just being heavier at the same body fat? Now, it's a lot easier when someone has a concrete goal, like I want my glutes to be 41 inches and I want my waist to be 24. That is like a benchmark that we can drive directly to, or I don't know, hopefully directly to. Now, if it's abstract, kind of like, I just want to look really insane, which I've talked about this client before, and so many of you thought that you were the client I was talking about, so which does make me chuckle. But she came to me and she's like, she doesn't work in fitness, but she had like events coming up, and she's like, I want to look like the fittest person at these events. And it's like a very just like normal job. And like, that was her goal. She's like, I want to use drugs because I have these like seminars coming up where I'll be speaking and I want to look ridiculous. Like, I want people to think that I'm a competitor, essentially. And for her, I found it intriguing because I was like, okay, like, you just want to look good. So like, how are we going to measure success? And that's where I do try to encourage clients. And with the client I was talking about initially for the start to this video, I'm like, okay, like, is it a performance metric? Is it the fact that like when you put on a bathing suit, you want to feel jacked, even like when you're fasted and have like no food in you, like you don't have to get a pump to feel jacked. Because if you're chasing just like an impressive look, you could very well keep justifying, if you're using PEDs to get there, you could keep justifying just upping the dose or adding in new compounds with really, I guess, without really setting this like endpoint. I personally believe like that then leads to misuse. So that's where I would just be really honest about, if you have a clear destination of like, I want my glutes to be this big and I want my delts to be this big and I don't want to gain body fat, or I want it to be very minimal, cool. But if it's just, I want to look jacked, if it's just like in the gym, I want to like feel like I am like elite, there's no shame in that. Like, I understand it, but we need to understand also like what's the threshold in which we've achieved said goal. So what I do for clients who have more of an abstract goal, which this client who I'm talking about in the video, she has more of an abstract goal, just wants to look fitter. At her age, she's like, I want like all my friends to think that I like theoretically could be on stage or do what you do. I'm like, that's amazing. And like, without having to get on stage, like we can absolutely build this incredible physique. Whether or not drugs should be involved, that's a different story. But I think for her, it actually made sense to not necessarily assign like a scale weight, but rather instead to be like, I want to emulate a bikini competitor type physique, which I also think can be like a benchmark, or at least like a metric that we use or define as like a destination. So with this client, I broke it down for her. I'm like, there are two different types of PEDs. There's the anabolics, so anabolic androgenic steroid, and then there's non-androgenic. And specifically, she came to me wanting to use Anavar and Clen. So I was like, okay, cool. One is an anabolic, one is a non-anabolic. So this works for this example. The anabolics, it is going to work by primarily increasing muscle protein synthesis, but there does come that risk of those androgenic effects, which no anabolic is devoid of that. So even like Anavar, even though it does have less of an androgenic potential, we still have to accept like that can happen. And with higher degrees of exposure, prolonged use, there's greater probability of that happening. Now, for listeners who are new, like I have tons of videos on virilization, on what this entails. Be sure to check out like the medium format videos that are not like full in depth. They're very animated and they're super cool because Emily does an amazing job there. But for anabolics, the biggest risk is virilization. And all that means is the masculinization, like the development of male characteristics. So deepening of the voice, clitoromegaly, acne, hair growth. Yes, there can be like facial changes, but that's not something we typically see with the kind of drug use that we're talking about with my demographic, or the kind of drug use I'm referring to. I digress. There's a potential, it's not a guarantee, but it's something that like I do try to educate clients on, because frankly, I know I'm not going to work with them forever. I know there's going to be a point where they can just go off and do their own thing. And I've had clients work with me who like, they like what I do and like what I promote, but are just a little more, or I guess not as risk averse. And once we stop working together, they kind of go off, do their own thing. So they might put a drug in place that I don't recommend, or they might put it at a dose that is a little bit too high. And because of that, like I try to do my due diligence when I'm like talking to a client who is very interested in using PEDs, and like we should have this firm understanding before they're introduced, that the longer you use them at higher dosages, that in itself will increase that probability of virilization. Now, when we get into non-androgenic compounds, these are things that are going to modulate heart rate, and so they can increase heart rate, they can manage blood glucose, they can encourage growth factors, but they don't have those same androgenic hits or risk as anabolics do. They do come with their own set of risks, so it's not like we can just put them in senselessly. And really, it just starts from like a firm understanding of like, okay, not all PEDs are created equally. So in the case that like she was going to go do this on her own and like just look at different forums or work with a coach who might not be as educated, I find it important for individuals to really assess like, do they have a firm understanding around which PEDs come with that risk of virilization and which ones do not? Because I think knowing the difference helps you understand which side effects and complications really to watch out for. But with anabolics, that's one that like it will increase, like the likelihood of these things happening will increase the more you use it or the longer that you use it for. Now, this doesn't completely apply to this client because like I have the background, like has she maxed out her natural potential? And the truth is no. I love her, but she's like very inconsistent. She kind of does whatever the fuck she wants. And I'm very honest with her. I'm like, if you were to follow this plan, you would get better results. You would probably get leaner in our fat loss phase. You'd probably build more muscle. You probably would feel better, but that's okay. She's kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, which is a consideration to make if someone's going to use PEDs. But even in her case, like she largely has spent time in the gym, just playing around. And people always ask, shouldn't I wait till I max out my natural potential? And the reality is there is a little bit of a gray area towards the end of what your natural potential is, where I could say, you know, hey, it's justifiable. I've had clients who have not maxed out their natural potential and they're like, I'm ready to use PEDs. And for this, that, or the other, we have an argument that's crafted that encourages, and I would say even supports them using PEDs before they max it out. Now, really the consideration around this is someone's risk tolerance. So in the case that someone is like, you know, like I want to build muscle, I want to use PEDs, but I don't want anything to change. That already tells me that we need to do as much as we can to max out the natural potential first. Then we kind of consider, okay, does this individual have a strict timeline? So I've had clients that have been like top level national competitors who it very much makes sense for them to use the PED because they're very close to turning pro. And if the difference is doing a cycle or taking another year off to build that muscle, I am completely fine if they understand those risks and if they agree that this is in support of their competitive career. Whereas if you have a client who doesn't really have this like hard line in the sand, this, and I guess I mean like more with like an upcoming date that they have to be ready by, I would lean more towards like, hey, like we have time to max this out. And truly, if you want to expedite it, we can. But really where I start to struggle or grapple with like the consideration around whether or not I'm enabling them to use it too soon is, are they doing everything I'm asking? And that's kind of like the sub question that like really I think about is like when someone asks like, do you think I've maxed out my natural potential? I'm like, well, you're not fucking doing what I'm telling you to do. So no, like I think if you listen to me, we would have a clearer answer. Let me put it this way. You take someone who has never been in the gym, just get them started on any kind of weightlifting program. They're probably going to build muscle, assuming that they're doing things relatively correctly and that they're eating not a very small amount and not overdoing cardio. Now, in this case, like this individual is experiencing newbie gains and some that are, we could even say are undeserving. Very much the same with anabolics. So for someone who's risk averse, I would largely say they don't want to incur virilization. Let's put you in a position where it's very difficult for you to gain muscle because of how much muscle you've already built. Let's put you in a position where we see that you can gain muscle. And even though you are proving that you can do this naturally. Let's create an environment that supports you continuing to do that. And once this progress starts to slow, maybe then we add in the anabolic. So he kind of treats it like, if I haven't done a proper warm-up, if I haven't touched lighter weights and cued correct technical positioning, and given myself the ability to work up to said weight, he almost defines it like, well, I really didn't deserve to lift any more than I did. And actually, no, here's a better example. He will oftentimes equate this and relate it to how he eats or how he recovers. So in the case that he's been under eating, which eating is a struggle for him on account of he has to eat a lot to maintain his weight. If he has been slacking and like eating on carbs or just not getting the food in, and like it's still a lot of food he has to get in. I'm talking like for him to maintain, it's like mid 300, for him to maintain, it's like mid 3000s. If he like, he's at 3000 right now and he's losing, like it's insane. So within that, it's kind of like, he knows if he's like just short, if he's like 2,500, 2,600 for multiple days before he goes into weight lift, he knows how it's going to feel. And that's like part of his analysis process is like, well, I haven't really done the things that I need to do. And I really respect that. And I think it's important to kind of adopt that mindset when it comes to PEDs is like, do you deserve to put them in place? Like, have you done the things that would facilitate them working to the best of their ability, to their fullest extent? And truly just like asking yourself, and this is like universal standard, are you at least consistent with your training, with your diet, with your recovery to actually put this anabolic in place and see what kind of return it could give? Because I think in a lot of cases, it's used almost in a way like it's used to compensate for holes in someone's program. It's not used to accelerate or facilitate faster results. And it's a shame because anabolics work really fucking good to build muscle. If you can't stick with your training program, if you can't prioritize recovery, then I don't think that you're ready. I would truly, and like for this client, I'm like, yo, just string it together for like 6 weeks. Just show me that you can do consistent weigh-ins. Show me that you can hit your macro target. And ultimately, like you can tell someone this, you can tell them the importance of these things, but like they have to see the value in it. They have to be bought in. So yeah. Now the other aspect that I discussed with this client was getting just like baseline lab values, just having a really good idea of how she's doing internally. And regardless of how advanced you are, I do think you need this baseline. And I think it's something you need to continue to take. And depending on what comes back, it might be something that you need to get checked a little more regularly. But I would get your labs done. You do want to see liver enzymes, kidney function, lipid profile, blood pressure, and if there's hidden hypertension or even poor cholesterol, introducing PEDs can accelerate these issues. And I don't see this largely with female clients, but I do see it heavily with men, that they'll be like 130 over 80, 140 over 90, and they'll be like, can we start TRT? Can we add Anavar or Mastron into my current cycle, which would really just be TRT. So anabolics in themselves, are they going to make blood pressure worse? Well, it depends. If you are already, let's say, leaning towards having very stiff arteries, if, let's say, you're using a lot of stimulants that are causing a very strong like pump and contraction of the heart, if you have plaque buildup, if you have any kind of dyslipidemia, if you have high degrees of circulating glucose, like these are all things that, not just with anabolics, I want to say, like, I want to look at, because I want to know what is the true actual, like as clear as I can get, what is the risk of putting this in place? Because for some people, even the non-androgenics are ones that we shouldn't really fuck with. It was wild how this happened, but I had 2 clients, this was a couple years back, both had pituitary adenomas, both wanted to use growth hormone. And I remember telling them, I'm like, we can't do that. You have like quite literally what could be a brain tumor. You have a mass. And even though it's reasonable right now, if you add this in, even if you add TRT in, like this in itself, like I'm not comfortable telling you to put this in place, because right now this isn't an issue. But you are going to have this the rest of your life. Like we're not going to be able to remove it. And maybe it's best that we don't. But realistically, if we're putting things that have excessive growth factors, or not even excessive, just are going to encourage growth factors, we have to understand that for anything that is cancer related, anyone who's at risk of cancer, we are encouraging that development. We're causing cellular turnover at a super physiological rate. So even though GH and like growth hormone peptides, they in themselves are not cancer causing, they could very well be cancer accelerating. So globally, just looking at comorbidities, making sure we have an understanding of like, what is the trajectory if we put this in place? And I like to think of it almost like not just like doing this cycle, but what if we do this cycle and then in a few months you want to do it again and you want to do it again? And let's say you do 3 more cycles. How much closer are you to having a system disorder? How much closer are you to needing medical intervention? And realistically, even things like blood sugar, blood pressure, they can sneak up on you, and they can be very, very silent kind of in the background. So I would have a baseline understanding of what your risk profile is, just you personally, but then also family history, and then understand if you're going to use PEDs, how those PEDs can alter, whether it be heart rate, blood sugar, blood pressure, and which ones could be downright dangerous depending on the severity of the comorbidity. I have another client who just checked in yesterday. We're talking about thyroid hormone in a more of like an HRT sense, but there's also concerns about her testosterone. And even though she's expressed not a big fan of needles, but I could very well be open to doing injections, really what gets me are the blood draws. Like how often would I need to go in to get my blood drawn? Like, do you think it'd be more than once a year? And this isn't black and white. I can't say even with this client, I've really decided whether or not TRT would make sense for her. But it is a consideration that like if getting blood drawn and getting labs done regularly is going to be a problem, if that individual is going to be traveling a lot, if they can't afford it, if they're not going to be consistent with going to the appointments, that would also be a consideration. Because it's not like you need to get labs checked like every week or even every month, but especially with something like TRT, I'm like, we need to know how well it's working. We need to know what it's doing and whether or not we need to adjust the dose. So for her, I'll probably end up just explaining like, here's generally what like first year on TRT would look like. And then once we have your dose, here is how that would look. But realistically, it's probably not as bad as she's imagining, where I think she is considering it like, oh, I'm going to have to do this every month, which wouldn't really be the case. However, if we were to start, we would need to get labs checked 5 weeks after starting. And let's say that dose was not high enough or was too high. I'd probably want to get labs checked again another 5 weeks after that. So that could seem like a lot, especially in the case she just got her panel done, get them done 5 weeks after starting TRT. After that, if we need another panel done, okay, another 5 weeks. That could be 3 panels in the course of 3 months. And that very well could be a tipping point where she's like, I'm not doing this. And if that's the case, we need to understand that, because that should guide our decisions around PED use. Another thing that I'll say about health is when we're talking about oral anabolics, so like Anavar, oral anabolics can heavily impact the liver. So if you already have elevated liver enzymes, you do need to be cautious. If you're on medications that cause liver elevation, hepatic dysfunction, this is something we should consider. If you're having trouble lowering these enzymes, even with medication in place or over-the-counter supplementation, I would be very cautious about starting an oral anabolic cycle. But bottom line, if you can't be bothered to check your current health status, if it's something that you're just like, I don't see the value in it, or maybe you see the value, but you're just like a little too lazy, you're not ready for PEDs. They can stress your organs and they can have deleterious effects. And best case scenario is you're in a place where hormonally you can't really even take advantage of them, but that is something that I will get to in the next section. Best case scenario, you put it in place, but hormonally you're not in a position where you can fully take advantage of it, which that is what we're covering next. Fertility, HPA access considerations, and how we need to understand what's going on under the hood prior to putting anabolics in. Now, if fertility matters, you do have to understand that PEDs, particularly anabolics, can suppress your endogenous hormone production. Now, while that doesn't guarantee permanent infertility, it can definitely complicate matters. And I think what's important to distinguish here is that, like, being in a state of low energy availability, being anovulatory, even if your calories are technically fine, being without ovulation is bad for fertility. So anything, PEDs or non-PEDs, that is going to cause you to not ovulate, that is going to be bad for fertility. Now, I almost audit it like, how many years of your life where you should have been ovulating have you actually been ovulating? So for individuals who, let's say, have been on hormonal birth control and it just like wiped out their HPA function, like they were not having a period at any point, they went this way. Like, I just did a seminar on this a few days ago, and one of the girls I spoke with after, she's like, I've been on birth control for 20 years, have had no periods. Like, it was not something I experienced. How long is it going to take till I get it back? I'm like, like it could be a while. So when we look at contributing factors, it's kind of like what I was talking about in the last section, is like, do you have comorbidities that would lend to a decreased ability to reproduce, to conceive? If that is the case, if you do have factors that like would contribute to you being infertile, for one, I would check these beforehand. I would check your AMH. I think the other one is AFC. I would talk to an OB if you're a female, a reproductive endocrinologist, a urologist if you're a male, and I would get a really clear idea. What is your reproductive function currently like? This could be something that, like, if you want to be really proactive, you could freeze your eggs, you could freeze your sperm, you could go, all the way to that sense so that you're like preserving what you have naturally. But I think having your body really evaluated, having your hormone levels checked, and getting a clear sense of like, what kind of impact will PEDs have? To me, that is crucial for individuals who would like to use PEDs, specifically competitors, but especially for individuals who also want to start family planning in the next few years. That's something that we need to discuss. And if you're at a higher risk, or you're wanting children soon, you should factor this into your cycle design, or even speak with a specialist, particularly about using anabolics. Now, HPA axis function, this is something that is already controlling your stress hormones and overall endocrine function. And we need to see that when you're in a non-diet state, a non-contest prep state, what does this look like? And then what does it look like when you're in these states of low energy availability where suppression is somewhat expected? And if you're finding that things go south really quickly, like even at the beginning of prep, you begin to lose your period, your hormones begin to tank, okay, is there merit to supporting these, even like with basal HRT, just to make sure that you're not in these extended states of suppression? Because for some competitors, like we're talking about months of dieting, 4 to 5 months, and then maybe 3 to 4 months of competing. And if we're talking about someone who wants to compete regularly or actively, like within the organization, then they very well could be competing annually or every other year. And if that's the case, that's a lot of time spent in these suppressed states. So for these individuals specifically, I would consider whether or not it makes sense to take them from a state of suppression and at least take them back to normal high. I did just do a video on the fundamentals of hormonal function and really hormonal optimization. I went through 6 hormones that, yes, I know it's not all of them, but I went through 6 in a somewhat shorter format. So if that's something you're interested in understanding and understanding why these sex hormones really play a significant role in your ability to ovulate as well as your physique goals, I would definitely recommend checking that out. But I think it's crucial to also understand that anabolics and other PEDs, they can disrupt normal feedback loops, potentially requiring PCT, so post-cycle therapy, or at least a plan to transition out of that cycle. It doesn't have to be by introducing other hormones or other compounds. It could very well just be modulating your program so that you're in a state where you can regain ovulation. But I think that going blind into a cycle without considering fertility or how the cycle might affect fertility is a recipe for issues down the road. So I would strongly recommend, regardless of sex, regardless of age, if family planning is ever something you want to consider, I would speak with your OB or your urologist and just get a baseline of like, what is your function currently like? And if it is on the lower side or if it is suppressed, this might make you want to reconsider that anabolic cycle. Now, what about informed consent? This means that you grasp all possible outcomes, even ones that have a very low likelihood of occurring. So this means in the case of an anabolic, androgenic effects, virilization, health impacts, potential regrets. And this is not just, okay, I might get acne or hair loss. It's also about long-term organ stress, changes to your physique, so i.e. virilization, even testicular atrophy in men, or even mood shifts. I think for most people, they do feel like they have a firm understanding of these risks, but they always assume that it won't happen to them. And I think ultimately this is what leads them to do more and more cycles or cycles with utilizing like higher dosages. And this is another client that I worked with previously who's coming back to me now, and she's like, hey, I did a cycle of a different drug than we talked about. I do think I virilized from it. I want to come back and work with you and do what we talked about initially. And it's like in situations like that, I'm like, she was informed, like I walked her through that these things could very well happen, and she just wanted to explore and see like, okay, how far can I push this? Because I know that she did cycles even after we discontinued working together. But she pushed it to a point that she was uncomfortable with. And like, I don't think that you should have to make that mistake or go that far necessarily to understand like where the line is. That's why I think it's really important to have a very clear, firm understanding of like what is too far, what is the point that I would discontinue PEDs like collectively, which even with her, I'm like, you said you virilized and you don't want to virilize, but you think that coming back to me and putting in a different compound, you think that will help us like evade virilization. Like, girl, no, like if your voice changed, like using more anabolics is only going to encourage this. I digress. I think it's important to make sure that if you have questions around these things, that you do talk to a professional, that you talk to someone that you trust. You can also talk to individuals who've used PEDs, which I know can be a little taboo in today's climate, but I would definitely try to ease any worries that you have. I guess I shouldn't say try to ease. I would try to fill in any gaps you have in your knowledge base. And if there are questions that just don't really feel clear, I would ask for further clarification, especially if you're working with a coach and they're kind of guiding you through this PED decision-making process. So what if you're not ready? Guys, there is nothing wrong with waiting. You will not feel worse by waiting to include PEDs for the first time. And I think there's a lot of bravery and a lot of humility to accept the fact that like you might not be in a position where you can fully take advantage of it. You might not fully understand the risk. It might not be the right time because of your family planning goals, but The reality is, if you're not comfortable with the level of risk or what's needed to take advantage of the PED, you can still push your natural limits further. And this was something I can tell you, even like being 10 years into the sport, I've always doubted whether or not I should just take more anabolics, whether I need to just do a cycle in order to have the physique that I want. And I can tell you last year was really eye-opening for me because I was able to tap into an aspect, really a domain within my current programming that wasn't PEDs that allowed me to drive more progress, that being training. Honestly, I think it's such a big decision, and I think you need to make sure that you are comfortable with the expected outcome and even unexpected effects that, even though we can say we hope won't occur, there still is that chance. So realistically, are you going to regret not doing the cycle if ultimately the outcome is you experience unwanted effects? No, you're going to feel better by being informed. And if things do happen, I can say I've worked with individuals who virilized, who have said in the past that they knew that what they were doing wasn't really safe. They knew that it was a little dicey, yet they continued anyway. Now being a little more mature, they're able to reflect and be like, I wish I had someone in my corner, kind of like you, Corey, who was like telling me like, no, like it's okay. We can wait. We can push this off. Like you're not pigeonholed into making a decision or doing this fitness thing, achieving this physique goal exclusively with PEDs. Like you can still make really good progress naturally. And there are definitely things that we can put in place over the counter that will support healthy hormonal balance that are not anabolics, that are not PEDs. But if you're uncertain, if this makes you really nervous to think about and it's something like you're just not comfortable with doing, this is likely a sign that you need more time. You need more deliberation, and maybe you need answers to questions that you haven't really put your finger on, you haven't completely formulated. So take your time. Do not feel pressure. I was fortunate that I had people pretty much around me my entire career that have encouraged me not to use PEDs. Ultimately, the decision is personal. It shouldn't be this knee-jerk reaction. And if you're gonna alter your body's hormones, if you're going to change that environment, do it intelligently, do it with clear guidance, and ensure that you have a plan to manage and then mitigate that harm. You guys, thank you for watching. I really enjoyed filming this for you. If you have any follow-up questions, anything you want to comment on below, let me know. As always, I will see you in the next one.